Morning at NTV.
Jory Museveni's TV addresses have become some of the most anticipated TV slots. Even his opponents are no longer sure what to say about the man leading the country's fight to defeat COVID-19. And as the country enters what is supposed to be the campaign period, opposition parties are going to be forced to change the calculations and tactics, while the president, his NRM's party, will seek to ride on the current goodwill. Our reporter Stephen Mbide is speaking to Major General Mugisha Muntu, the national coordinator of the Alliance for National Transformation Party, a new party that was still in the process of establishing its national structures. Mbide.
Morning, Andy Chamagero, and you who is viewing NTV. This is Morning at NTV. Yesterday,
Yep.
I'm here with Geno. I'm in charge of Major Geno. And it's been a while since I last saw you in public spaces, away from the social media spaces. How have you been? At least for yesterday, I saw you at court, but it's been a while. How have you been, Geno?
Keeping well, by God's grace.
All right. How has the COVID-19 situation taken you on?
Well, it's the nature of pandemics. You know, they break out at times without any warning, and they can cause paralysis in a society because they are limited in nature. Some of them can be limited to a sub-region or a region, at times in a continent. The nature of COVID-19 is that it's literally, global and on a wide scale. I think that's what makes the biggest difference. And it's just shaken up almost everything. Paralyzed countries, stopped economies, caused death in high rates, unfortunately, in some countries. Fortunately, in others, it hasn't been as disruptive in terms of the death, but it's disrupted economies without doubt, disrupted the lives of people, even where there have been no death, where you find, the whole country is shut down, movement is shut down. So it's an experience from which we need to learn lessons.
On an overview, how do you gauge the reaction from the government, the way it's handling this COVID situation, the way the measures, the directives here and there, the way they're being implemented? What's your general overview?
I think up this point so far, the government as well as the population, there's been a putting together as a society, as a community, for all of us to confront this problem. I think the experts, more so I believe those who are in the Ministry of Health, I think must have given good advice to government. And the government also took the necessary measures to do all the things which are necessary to contain the spread, because I think that is the biggest weapon that we have, more so the underdeveloped countries, and contain it early enough so that it wouldn't cause as many deaths as we have seen happen in other countries, even the developed countries. Because in some of the developed countries, even when there has been a bit of an escalation, and the deaths have been quite high, but they've got economies, once they are ramped up and their systems come into play, then they can contain the situation without them escalating beyond where they would be. The biggest problem, of course, with the third world countries, where you find, or developing countries, where you find very weak systems. When it comes to the health services, for example, where you find they are so ill-equipped that if they were to face the same challenge to the magnitude that we have seen in some countries, like, for example, what we've seen happen in Italy, in Spain, United States, that would be quite devastating.
Yesterday we just completed the 14 days lockdown period, and we got to 21 days, at least from the directive from the president and the cabinet. What would you say that what's your general reaction? Because people have been going through hard time, 2 weeks, but now you can have to contain the 3 weeks or the 21 days.
I think inevitably there had to be an extension because we are still dealing with the state of uncertainty in terms of information. Because to a certain extent, at least they have tracked well those who came from outside. To a large extent, they have contained spread from those who came from outside. But it seems that there isn't adequate information yet as to where there could have been people who could have filtered in from across porous borders that could cause infections in the country without us being able to detect them early enough. And unfortunately, the capacity to investigate, capacity to test is not that up to the levels that would be required. And therefore, in that state where there isn't adequate information, I think it was wise for the extension to be done. Unfortunately, of course, it has got its underside, the effects to it. I mean, it's disrupted people's lives. More so the biggest population that lives, on day-to-day incomes, hand to mouth. That is one that is mostly hard hit. Businesses, of course, have also been disrupted, which also causes its own effect. But overall, I think it is better that they do they carry out the measures that have been carried out for, preventive purposes than to risk and lift the lockdown when they don't have adequate information and the outcomes of which, if, for example, there were people who are not yet detected and the spread escalates, that would be quite
Major General,
frightening. So I believe they were right in doing what they did.
I want to pick your mind on the way the security agencies are. You served as the Army commander before, and we saw in the past 2 weeks, you've seen some security agencies, LDUs, Army and police, as well as some other DCs across the country, the way they've been implementing these directives has been some of them, not all of them, at least they've been so harsh on the people. At least it's also hard to call for the intervention of the president. But you who has been in those circles of security, what would you tell these people, and also the people who keep on provoking some of these security agencies?
Initially, there seems to have been panic, and there also seem not to have been clear briefs or directives from the agencies, and therefore, in some cases, the security agencies used unnecessary methods to enforce the directives which had been given. Fortunately, when the president came in, it looks like there was some bit of slackening. In the last few days, we have not seen that. I just last night saw some LDUs who are being tried.
And some Army officials
and
were
some,
tried in Gulu.
Yes, and hopefully that can enable those who are in uniform to recognize that we are in this together, everybody. And that therefore they should also understand there needs to be goodwill in terms of the whole population. That even when they are carrying out orders to enforce, for example, curfew, they must do it firmly but in a humane way. But at the same time, we're watching the regime, whether it's just doing some things and leaving out others, or whether it is a change of heart and one hopes that it will remain permanent even after COVID-19 ends, or whether it is just for this particular purpose. I think what COVID-19 really needs to teach all of us, we need to learn lessons, that there needs to be a change of heart, a change of direction in the way things are done. Because about 2-3 months ago,
What about the situation?
well, to understand that there is an interconnectedness in people, in any community, in any society, that we must be dependent on each other, but even on a larger scale as countries, because this is global. You can imagine something which shuts down literally the whole world. Well, it shows, it clearly shows us that we are not in control as we pretend to be. You know, when you are in a situation like in charge of a government or a corporate body, you may feel that you are powerful. But when something like this happens, a pandemic happens, almost out of the blue, and it shakes literally everything. It shakes countries even which are considered to be superpowers, countries which have got nuclear weapons at their disposal, countries which have got large economies. And they are shaken to an extent where you find that they literally lose control at times.
You know,
And you find, for example, on countries where you find we have got government. You can be in charge of the treasury. You can be in charge of the army, the police, intelligence services. You may think you can kick everybody around. But something happens suddenly, and you literally find you are now out of control. It needs us to reflect. Know that, even when we do things that we do, it must be in the interest of everybody who is in that society. That we must humble ourselves and know that even when you are in control of a country, that there is a power beyond you. That there are things you can control, there are things you cannot control. And therefore, we need to learn within these situations where literally something comes and knocks everybody off balance, that we need to readjust, that we need to reconsider, and therefore see how to manage societies in a better way.
Readjustment.
Yeah.
This being the year that's leading us to an election year, this should have been a time of consultations.
Yeah.
I know you, as Alliance for National Transformation,
Yes.
you had a program towards the end, moving around the country. But now we see things being turned around. How is this situation affecting your political programs as ANT?
In fact, the day when they shut down, we were up country, when on our countrywide tour, and we had to pull back, and we are hoping that the moment that the lockdown will end soon, and once it ends, then we'll resume our activities. Of course, that means we've got to operate at a much faster rate than before, because we have lost so far almost close to 3 weeks now. Now 3 weeks have been added, so basically we have lost about 2 months.
Right, and I know you had planned to have a delegates conference in June. Is this still possible?
We will have to have discussions within our interim committee, the executive committee, and make the necessary decisions depending on what we read on the ground.
I know during 2012, 2017, when you were the president of FDC, Forum for Democratic Change, many of your opponents within the party were saying, we are just critical of the way you were operating, and they thought you were so slow. I just want to understand your style of administration, because at least for now, you haven't had any conflict and dissenting voices from Alliance for National Transformation. How is work inside there? And I don't know, how much have you been able to cover as ANT?
We are at peace in the manner in which we operate. We are focused on building a party with a foundation and rooted in values. It has got its own short-term considerations that we must focus on, but overall it's a long-term project, because we want to build an institution that outlives all of us. We also want to build an institution that operates completely different from what we've seen so far since our independence. Because one, we recognize that our main effort, the short term, is to remove a regime, but at the same time we know that the way these regimes have acted for the last 58 years, it's just the nature of our regimes is because of the mindsets of leaders. That's why our politics is the way it is. So we recognize that even us, when we take power, we must focus on how to change the culture of politics, how it is managed. And therefore, some people may think that we are slow, but we are deliberate and conscious about what we are doing. Because we know managing power, you start from the mindset. It's not just change of faces. Because you can change faces, different people can come in, but if they operate from the same mindset, if they do not recognize that the biggest problem is the political culture and therefore focus on changing that, you can end up doing the same things that those whom you removed were doing.
When you talk about the political culture, there are so many impediments to free and fair process within the political governance.
Yeah.
The other day, the Constitutional Court was declaring that Section 8 of the Public Order Management Act should be lifted, and indeed they lifted it. But before, we've seen the police coming in and stopping political activities like gatherings, and even then, the electoral process now, by now would have been able to cover the youth local council elections, but this is not in place. What do you think should be changed in the culture of what we do politically, in the management of politics, by the police, by the electoral commission, and you, the politicians who are in the efforts of trying to push a culture that is of good governance for our country?
You know, for anything to effectively be done, more so here in our country, first, we must believe in the law. Once there is a law, as it is established, as it is written, follow it. Biggest problem, as you are talking about POMA, as it is, you can even operate without disruptions. But the problem is that you have a law, but even those who are supposed to administer it don't administer it as it is written. They manipulate it. I mean, within the law as it is now, if people were following the law as it is, we wouldn't even have a problem. For example, you're talking about the elections. The electoral law, if it is managed by a body which is independent, if it is not manipulated, you can conduct a free and fair and transparent election even within the law as it is, if you have got people who have got goodwill. Yes, there are certain areas that need to be adjusted, where amendments need to be conducted. But the problem, I don't think, is in the law. The problem is in those who manage the institutions which are supposed to administer the law, including the topmost in government, and that's always where the problem comes from. So that's what we have to change. Because you can manipulate the law, even when it is good. And that's what has happened from 1962 until now. And that's what has to change. Because you can even do adjustments within the law, you can conduct the necessary amendments, but as long as the people who have power are not ready to operate within the law, then you always have the conflicts that we have always had. And that's what we have to concentrate on. And that's what we are doing literally in our pursuit of changing the country, in transforming the country, to ensure that we have got people, the majority in the party, who believe in constitutionalism, who believe in the rule of law, because that's where you start from. And we know that there are many Ugandans who believe in constitutionalism, who subscribe to constitutionalism, the rule of law, and that's why we are doing things in a way to attract more and more, so that we can shift the balance of forces in our society, in our country, so that you can have a party that takes power, and you find that the majority of them subscribe to the belief, the rule of law, not by word of mouth, but in practice, in their belief systems.
I just want also to pick your mind on the Parliament is still sitting, even as we go, as people stay at home. Right now, the members of Parliament are watching you on NTV. Yeah. Just speak to them. What should they be doing, especially now that they're into a budgeting period? What adjustments should they be doing, making sure that our economy stays up, and also these key sectors should be given this adequate funding?
They should concentrate on the areas that impact people's lives. Health and education are very critical areas in the lives of people, in the lives of communities. I mean, this COVID-19 is a wake-up call, I think, to all countries. You can see that the countries which have concentrated resources, for example, in the health sector, even when they are hit, their response capacities are quite high, and therefore they can take care of their populations. We are fortunate enough that we've not been hit as other countries have been hit. But most of the developing countries, if we are hit as hard as we see some of the countries, the way they've been hit, it would be an absolute disaster. Because you look at preparation, for example, in intensive care capabilities of a society. And you find that, for example, if you had 1,000 cases that need critical care in ICUs, and you find, for example, that you've got only 55 in a country, you can see where the problem lies. Two, where you find that even if you had them, even if you had the money and bought the equipment, if you have not trained healthcare workers who have got the capabilities to manage them or to operate them, still you'll have a problem. So education and health are very, very critical. And therefore there needs to be focus on them, not just talking as we've seen. So this shaking should be a wake-up call for all of us, but more so for those who are in positions where they can influence the budget, not only for the next year, but even right now where we are. Parliament needs to, pressurize the government to look at this period. In the last 2 weeks, we've just gone through 2 weeks. There's been an extension for 3 more weeks. There are people who are highly vulnerable. And really, government, including parliament, they need to analyze the situation even as we go in the next 3 weeks. Hunger cannot wait.
The government is distributing some food at least.
Yes, which is good, which we do recommend. But they must have measures of monitoring and find out whether those who are vulnerable are getting the food as fast as they should. Because beyond 3 days, you can get people, starving. And therefore, there needs to be a concentration and hands-on effort throughout all this period that is remaining until the lockdown is lifted, to ensure that at least whilst we are fighting on the front of preventing the pandemic from spreading, but that nobody at least dies from lack of food. I mean, it would be absolutely inexcusable if anybody died out of hunger. Absolutely. So there needs to be a mechanism of monitoring, more so in the areas where people have been in towns, because people live hand to mouth, quite a significant number of them. They don't have jobs. Therefore, if they don't have money, and also they don't have food, you can expect what will happen out of that.
Let me also pick your mind on, during 2015, you were part of the platform that was trying to, the TDA platform, trying to come up with a single candidate for the general election 2016. That process fell apart. Just last year, we had plans, you trying to meet your power leader, Robert Chagulanyi, Honorable MP, and also some other political leaders like Honorable Norbert Mao, DP. This was trying to focus almost on the similar aims. What is the update now? We are trying to also come up with the national dialogue, but still, you still have these political differences within different political actors. What's the process? What's the update now? How far have you moved towards this process of having interpolitical party discussions on the way ahead in 2021?
Well, we have to focus on what to start doing immediately after the lockdown is lifted, which I believe will happen soon, by God's grace. And again, this crisis that we've gone through needs to wake us all up. Understand how vulnerable we are as countries. Look at a situation that could have, could happen in a country like ours, in a crisis of this nature. We are highly vulnerable, and therefore, even those of us who are preparing to take power, we need to reflect. Because we need to understand what is primary and what is secondary. We need to rethink, to know the things which we can just leave aside and work on a number of compromises to see how we build ourselves, build our capabilities, gain trust from the population, but also prepare ourselves in how to manage power when we take it, because taking it is one thing, managing it is another. But when we recognize how vulnerable we are as a country, it enables us to recognize that, there are certain, individual considerations which we must really put aside as we look onto the considerations which affect the whole country. And if we changed our ways and looked at things that way, I believe most of the internal contradictions within our parties, within our political formations would lessen. Because most of the times, the differences are not ideological, the differences are not on policy differences. Most times they are petty differences about,
finally,
individuals.
Okay. Yeah. Finally, as we wind up, yesterday you had a failed attempt of rescuing or bailing out your comrade, Freedom War comrade, Lieutenant General Mukunde. Do you have trust or faith in the court system as we wind up briefly?
It's again, that's something so unfortunate. Even when we're involved in such a crisis, one would have hope that the regime will recognize that there's a need for goodwill all around because we are in all this together. So when you see the law being manipulated, like I recognize that I suspect that there must be a lot of pressure on the judiciary itself. I don't see how, for example, in the case of Lieutenant General Henry Tumkunde, that they could deny him bail just because they wanted two of the sureties to be serving army officers at his rank, at which he retired, or higher. We are now out of the army. We are not in uniform. We just cannot be subjected to the laws as they are in UPDF. Any civilian, even if I wasn't one of the sureties, any credible person could stand surety for someone who is already a civilian who is already out of uniform. So they should not make it seem as if it was a crime for us to serve our country in uniform.
Okay, thank you so much. Retired Major General Grigori Mugisha Mtunyera, former Army Commander, former ERA Member of Parliament, and the former President of Forum for Democratic Change, and now the National Coordinator of Alliance for National
Transformation.
This is Morning at NTV. Stephen Mbide here, taking you back to the studio for now.
Yeah, that was quite an impressive conversation.